We're really thrilled to invite you here to the 12th event in our America's Rural Opportunity Series. I am Janet Topolsky. I'm Executive Director of the Community Strategies Group, one of the programs here at the Aspen Institute. Our group, Aspen CSG, works to connect, motivate, and equip local leaders who are really trying to build more prosperous regions while simultaneously trying to advance those living on the economic margins. And over our 35 years, and this is our 35th year at the Aspen Institute since our founding, we focused most of our work in rural America. The America's Rural Opportunity Series was an idea that's a partnership between the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group and the Rural Development Innovation Group. The Rural Development Innovation Group came together back in mid-2016, and it's a set of seasoned practitioners who do deep work in rural America on economic development, community development, and many aspects of it, that really wanted to begin to highlight a rural opportunity agenda, to really raise up for the country what's working in rural, what are the innovations that are making things happen to build prosperity in rural communities and to increase opportunity, to help people understand why those things are working, and to really help us all understand how to more effectively invest for more prosperity in rural America and more opportunity. The America's Rural Opportunity Series is one way we're lifting up what is working in rural America and in rural economies, and to help low-income people, places, and firms get ahead. Today's session and today's topic, Gaining by Degrees, Increasing Rural Education, Career, and Community Success, gives us the opportunity to focus on one critical component of improving rural futures, and specifically that's increasing the number of rural youth who pursue and complete a higher education degree or some kind of professional certification. Beyond that, what we're talking about today is how to connect a higher proportion of those youth back to living and working in their home communities and home regions in rural America. Anyone who travels the wide range of rural America knows that there are jobs going wanting in many rural regions. Rural businesses bemoan the difficulty to fill both entry-level and well-paying career jobs across the country. One contributing factor to that is higher education attainment. Another is people actually knowing about the jobs that are available in their regions. And a third is building robust and creative partnerships between education and business within a rural region to train people both for today's jobs and tomorrow's jobs. We're going to hear about all three of those topics today. Before we dig in, I want to celebrate that in addition to the Rural Development Innovation Group and the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, we welcome as co-conveners today the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program, as well as RootEd. RootEd also generously provided the financial support to put together today's event, for which we are ever grateful. What is RootEd, you might ask? Well, to give you a brief introduction to RootEd and their work, I want to welcome Noah Meyer, who is both partner and head of philanthropy and social impact for BDT and Company and the president of the RootEd Alliance. Noah?
Thank you, Janet, and good afternoon, everyone. We are so grateful to partner with Aspen and the Community Strategies Group on this event. My name is Noah Meyer, and I am the head of philanthropy and social impact at BDT and Company. I'm also president of RootEd Alliance, a collaborative philanthropic effort that BDT supports. It's a real honor to be joined today by some of our closest partners in RootEd Alliance and biggest sources of inspiration supporting rural students, including Janet Ayers and Dr. Higdon. A few years ago, our clients at BDT expressed an interest in coalescing around a big idea in education that was overlooked and under-resourced, and where we could have a great impact if we worked together. Guided by the personal histories of both our founder and many of our clients, we realized that there was a huge opportunity to invest in creating stronger future for rural students in the United States. As you know, rural communities are facing complex and interconnected challenges, from struggling local economies to poor health and high poverty. At the same time, rural areas receive less than 5% of philanthropic dollars nationally. Amidst these challenges, we were struck by, on the one hand, the low number of rural students continuing their education after high school, and on the other hand, the power of education to overcome these myriad issues. And so we started looking for bright spots and for solutions that were working, organizations and communities that were changing these odds. Along our journey, we came across a college president who was doing some extraordinary work in rural Pennsylvania, Dan Porterfield, who invited us to come visit to see some of the work directly that he was doing with many rural students in rural Pennsylvania. And that's where a conversation began, but we had no way of knowing at the time that it would lead us here. So we're also delighted to continue the conversation with Dan and his leadership here at the Aspen Institute. Out of our search to find solutions for that work, Rooted Alliance was born. Rooted is an alliance of both funders and practitioners on the ground to unlock opportunities in rural areas, to accelerate the impact of local efforts and spread what's working across different communities. Through our incredible partners, we have provided over 5,000 students to date with the advice, exposure, and access to financial support that they need to access post-secondary and career opportunities. And early learning for us was that increasing post-secondary education can't happen in isolation. It can't come at the expense of rural students leaving their communities behind. With limited post-secondary options close to home and few job prospects, this is unfortunately a dilemma that many students in rural areas face. That's why it's so important that post-secondary programs are aligned with local workforce needs, and that institutions and organizations that make rural communities thrive are driving these kinds of efforts. Today, we're thrilled to have a group of panelists who can speak directly to what it's like leading this work in rural areas and helping students make more informed choices about their college and career potential. But we also recognize that philanthropy can only go so far. The needs are deeper and broader than grants alone can address. And not every community is lucky enough to have someone like our funders or Jim and Janet Ayers investing back in their communities. Philanthropy can play a critical role in initiating this work and providing the risk capital, but it also is important for public officials, businesses, and others to understand the needs and potential of rural communities. That's why we're so excited about this event today. By shining a light on the solutions that work, we hope to start a dialogue that can extend to many more rural communities. Thank you. Back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Noah. And now for a few logistical details before we really dig in. Handouts. If you're here in the room, and the room is filled despite the coronavirus, I might add, if you can link to the America's Rural Opportunity page for today's panel, and you can download the 2 handouts that are on everyone's chair here in the room. So if you're looking for handouts, that's where they are. If you have questions for our speakers, don't wait. Tweet them to #RuralInnovation. #RuralInnovation, all one word. We will be answering questions later today that come in from the room, but also from out there in the country, so please do that. And to get more updates, you can share your own stories of rural innovation at as.pn/rural or follow us on Twitter at @RuralInnovators. Now, to set the stage for our discussion, we want to look at some data, right? Data that will ground us in the current rural realities and related to rural education attainment and its connection to rural economic development. For that, we will turn to Robert Templin Jr., or we call him Bob here, who is a shining star, or technically a senior fellow with our colleague program, the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program. Bob has served as a president of a rural Appalachian community college, but most recently, he was president of Northern Virginia Community College, known around here as NOVA. And that's Virginia's largest public institution of higher education, which a lot of people don't know, and one of the nation's largest and most diverse community colleges. Bob is also chairman of the board of directors of Achieving the Dream, a national community college reform network. Bob, please deliver the data.
Thank you, Janet. So my job is to help ground our conversation today about what works within the context of what's going on. And so the good news is that educational attainment in rural America is increasing, but it's not increasing enough. If we take a look, particularly as it contrasted with urban metropolitan areas, post-secondary educational attainment while we're making strides, still significantly lags behind and a growing gap between urban America. Among those counties in America with the lowest educational attainment, the lowest 10%, 84% of them are located in rural America. It's a significant number of our population, 21 million adults are without a postsecondary credential in rural America. But this is, I would maintain, not a function of ability, but opportunity. This is not an ability gap, it's an opportunity gap. And just a couple of data points to exemplify that. Rural students outperform their peers on our national standardized measures of math and English. Almost a quarter of rural students earn post-secondary education credit through dual enrollment, typically with community colleges, much more than in other places. It's true that they do not, in the same proportion, participate in advanced placement when compared to urban areas. Fewer people from rural areas are enrolled in college. When we take a look at the contrast, college-going rates in rural America continue to lag behind suburban and urban America. But let's look at examine the reasons why. It is significantly more, households in rural America typically make 20 to 25% less median household income when compared with urban areas. Geographic distance makes college access more difficult. In fact, 82% of Americans that live in places that higher education is inaccessible, that is, where an institution is 30 miles or more from their home, 82% of them live in rural America, creating what we might call higher education deserts. It's very hard to go to college if you can't get to college. It's very hard to go to college if you can't afford a college. And rural America has both of those challenges. When we take a look at national data again, particularly low-income rural Americans have significantly lower college-going rates. That's not true for upper-income rural students, though, and the answer there is that they typically go away to a four-year college that they can afford. Rural poor can neither afford nor can they get to four-year colleges. And so, as we look at the persistence rates, if you're in college and you're a rural American, you're actually competing quite favorably if you're in college. Persistent rates for low-income rural students is the lowest of all the groups, but you'll notice the gaps are not large. It gets back to the point that what we're witnessing with regard to college going and college attainment is not a function of ability, but a function of a lack of opportunity. And many of the students who do go to college in rural America select community colleges because that's their best, no, wait a minute, that's their only option. And typically they bring to the community college all of the myriad of poverty and other reasons why going to college is difficult for them, and their college attainment rates lag behind that of public four-year and private nonprofit universities. So for particularly rural low-income students, the barriers that they face are significant for going to college, staying in college, and completing college. But if we take a look at all students together that are attending higher education from rural America, while they don't compete and persist as well as suburban students, they are outperforming urban students. So back again to my point that rural students don't lack ability, they lack opportunity. The difficulty that we find is that students that do go away to college and earn a bachelor's degree are not likely to return to rural America, in part because the variety of job opportunities and the pay is much better in many metropolitan areas. And so we see the gaps. The gaps don't exist particularly for high schools, those with a high school diploma only, but they certainly do with those that have post-secondary credentials. Part of the reason for that is that since we've looked at the last Great Recession in our country, most of America has recovered from the recession. But in many parts of rural America, we're still losing jobs. So the red line, the non-adjacent rural, represents much of rural America. Rural areas attached to metropolitan areas have recovered, but isolated rural communities are not. And so, but still, even though there is that lack of recovery, there are job opportunities in rural America. The growth that is there has been characterized in part by low-wage service jobs, but we also have significant numbers of job vacancies in rural America that require post-secondary credential, and the residents don't have the knowledge and skill necessary to qualify for those jobs, or they don't know that they're there. Typically, we find post-secondary requirements for the following jobs that are available in rural America, and most of those areas can provide job holders with family-sustaining wages. So the dilemma that we have is, or a paradox of college attainment for rural America, is that we need to get educational attainment in rural areas up if those communities are to prosper. In order to get them up right now, too many people have to leave their communities, and those left behind cannot afford higher education as it's currently structured. And when students do complete a post-secondary credential because they have to leave, they don't come back. So we're left with the notion that we should be able to leverage the assets of rural communities and think about ways to grow our own within communities where students are much more likely to complete by staying in their communities and taking the jobs that are available. That's the paradox that we have today. It shouldn't be that students have to leave their communities to get an education and not return. Janet?
Thank you. So now let's get our panel started. The way our session will run is that our moderator will queue up the opening thinking and stories from each of our panelists and have them present in turn, and then ask the group some questions to time at the end for some questions and comments from people here in the room and the live stream audience. So start sharing your questions at any time. We'll be writing them down at #RuralInnovation, question early and often. Now, I want to introduce our moderator, who is a surprise guest. We had recruited Aspen and Executive Vice President Eric Martley, who grew up in rural Alabama and went off to college, and he would have sparkled. He really would have. But he was called away for another purpose, and at the last minute, so we had to settle instead for the president of the Aspen Institute, Dan Porterfield, to moderate our panel. Now, oddly enough, Dan knows something about this topic. Before he came to Aspen, Dan most recently served for 7 years as president of Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Dan is a champion for rural America and for underserved rural students in higher education. Dan proved that when he was president of Franklin and Marshall by tripling the number of Pell Grant students attending college, improving racial, geographic, and class diversity of the student body, including for underserved rural students. That included using some of the innovations we're going to highlight today, as I imagine we will hear as we go on. So his effort there also led to the creation of the American Talent Initiative, an alliance of top colleges and universities with a national goal of enrolling 50,000 more high-achieving low-income students in leading institutions by 2025, which is now only 5 years away, right? So it also led to Dan being recognized as a White House champion of change in 2016. So Dan, I turn the conversation over to you, our newly minted Aspen Institute champion of rural change.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you all for being here, all who are logging on. Awesome presentations from Noah and from Bob. Thanks for kicking us off. The Aspen Community Strategies Group that Janet has led for many years is making impacts all across America and all types of communities, not only rural communities, but amazing array of rural communities that look to Janet and her team for incredible technical assistance, access to convening opportunities, leadership development, problem solving. It's quite an amazing set of accomplishments, a program that you built. And similarly, the program that Bob's a part of, the College Excellence Program, is the preeminent organization in the country on community college excellence, awarding the Aspen Prize to top performing community colleges on a every other year basis, and also having created two really significant training programs for either community college presidents who have just been selected, or high-performing almost presidents to get them ready for the presidency. And to both programs, thank you so much. If you don't know the Aspen Institute, we are, I would call us almost a hybrid organization that drives change towards a free, just, and equitable society in many different ways as a nonprofit organization, from particular policy studies to leadership programs to major convenings to collective impact work that we do together with other organizations. We don't stop. And this is a critical, successful program of the Institute, and so it's great to have you involved here today to share some of your experiences, especially lessons learned, and what can we do to do an even better job as a country in putting power in the hands of communities and families to make sure that these kids can develop the greatness that's inside of them. So let's start with Janet Ayers. You and your husband, Jim, have created a foundation and run it for more than 20 years that is really making a difference in communities in Tennessee and also a little bit of a work in Missouri. Will you tell us what your foundation does and how it relates to the topic today?
Really the crux of why we started the foundation is Jim and I both are from very small rural communities in Tennessee, and realized in these communities we'd been very successful, and realized that we came from families that believed in higher education. Not every family has that or the ability to have access, and truly believe that higher education is the leg up, the way out for economic prosperity. And so we started in Parsons, Tennessee, Decatur County, and just because that's where Jim grew up. It was a couple of things. Probably the two things that came together that related for this topic and really created the Ayers Foundation was that Jim was watching a TV program and saw where somebody had been very successful in the business and wanted to give back to his home community, and created a scholarship program for his alma mater, his high school.
Yeah.
So that really was intriguing to him. But at the same time, simultaneously, he served on a community college board, Jackson State Community College, and what happens was there's a lot of scholarships that you have to meet certain criteria, and as a board they would sit there and they would go through that scholarship criteria, and they'd turn the page because nobody was eligible for it. Well, Jim's sitting here scratching his head saying, I know that there are people in my home community that could benefit from those scholarships that have no idea how to access those scholarships, and I want to do something to give back. So the Ayers Foundation was created basically based on those two premises, is to how do you take away the excuse of I can't afford college, by being able to put those college tuition dollars in the students' hands. But the brilliant part was to have a counselor at the high school, embedded at the high school, not a guidance counselor that every high school has, because that's not really their primary role, but somebody primarily focused on finding last dollar scholarships out there and connecting each student where they are to obtain education after high school.
And you could take credit for almost inventing a field. The field being, how do we embed in schools, especially ones that serve low-income communities, informed resource persons who can get to know young people, hear about their interests, their particular family circumstance, their values, get to know them, build some trust, and help them create the future they would like to create with higher education on many different types as the pathway forward. Now there's many more efforts around the country, and we'll hear about some others in a few minutes, but you really were at the very beginning of this. And what, how did that happen? Was it a lightning bolt in the middle of the night? You sat up and said, Jim, I got it?
I wish I could say that was what it was.
Did you two sit down and say, okay, we want to serve, this is the way? Your values must have informed this choice to use your resources this way.
The great thing about us is that we didn't enter into this as educators or in the education. We're business people. We met through the nursing home industry, and Jim's a banker. So we approached this from a very business perspective. And the lightning bolt wasn't so much as we've learned through business, just putting money in front of someone doesn't change something. We knew the scholarship piece took that off the table. But the real part of it was putting that counselor in the school and removing barriers.
Yeah.
And if we were to describe in just one line what we are, we're barrier removers. And it came from that business side of what we do, and really probably from that nursing home model of that intake and what happens in the nursing home. Everything revolves around that social worker.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of a social work model. It's that wraparound service that we knew that in order to really get in there and interact with those students, we had to be on the ground in that school, being able to be that place that those students were comfortable coming to, and then we provide the wraparound. And it's almost like education becomes a byproduct of all of the other work that we were doing. But I would have to attribute it to business acumen and that health background of social work.
How beautiful. We're going to meet one of your barrier breakers in a moment.
Yes, we
Brianna
are.
Morton. Let me ask you two other quick questions, and then I'll roll through and ask each panelist a few questions, and we'll sort of gather it up. But my first question is, your foundation's an operating foundation,
Correct.
and that means that Brianna and some of the other counselors work for you. And just tell us how that works.
And that was an evolution too, because we're in our 21st year, but we are a private operating foundation. We started as a private foundation, so early on in our work, our staff was, while they worked for us in theory, they were employed by the school system, and then we wrote a check to the school system. Again, it was a business thing. That person that is on your employment, there's something, and maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, but whoever signs that paycheck is kind of where that loyalty comes from. And so we realized in order for them not to become embedded in bureaucracy, they needed to become an employee of the foundation.
So, and that means you also had to build trust with the school system.
Correct.
Because they had to let you bring your employees in.
Correct.
Say a word about that, because obviously you succeeded.
We did, and we created, and results bring trust. Yeah. So we were already starting to deliver trust. But it's kind of knowing that small community, but we did a memorandum of understanding with that school system that we will bring those employees, because it's not just the fact that they were allowing us in the building and providing space. Those staff share confidential information back and forth, so it is a strong sense of trust. I think what helped us a lot is because we were already very well established in those rural communities as an employer, from the banking perspective and from the nursing home perspective, so that they knew on a different place. If we had come in as maybe just as a foundation coming in, it may have been different, but they knew us as business owners and operators in the community.
Yeah. So, this is a big asset of rural communities, that people know each other.
Correct.
And so it's easier to build something new with trust, because it's not a cold, new transactional experience. It's a level of friendship and respect right from the start.
Correct.
I want to ask you one more question. To the end of the panel is Hal Higdon, who is the chancellor of Ozark Technical Community College System, which we're going to call OTC a lot today. And so he's got a couple different campuses and programs and 20,000 some students. And thanks to Rooted, there's a through line here. You're working with Hal a little bit, and we'll get to him in a minute. But would you just say a little bit about what you're doing with OTC?
Through our partnership with Rooted Alliance, which has been a fantastic thought partner for our foundation. It's really been a game changer for us. But through that relationship, one of the things that we realized that we could do with that alliance is we don't have to go and recreate everything that we're doing, but those bright pockets of things that we can do, we can also teach and train, so we grow our own. And so through Rooted Alliance, we are teaching and training advisors at OTC, so that they have their own embedded counselors at the community college, which is a place that most rural students go to, and doesn't necessarily have that strength and support that those first-generation rural students have. And so through his leadership, they realized they needed something, didn't want to start from the very beginning, and we're teaching and training their staff.
Fantastic. And this is one of the things that philanthropy can do, of course, is can make the connections that catalyze change.
Yes.
So let's go to Brianna. Bree, I know it's a lot of fun sitting next to your boss for an interview. So you work at Riverside High School, is that right?
Yes, sir, Riverside High School.
And where is it, and what's it like as a school?
So Riverside High School in Decaturville, Tennessee. I've been there for about 8 years now. Rural West Tennessee, on the river, Student population at the high school, we have about 550 students, excuse me, very similar to my high school that I also graduated from. And most of our students go to our local community colleges, or we also have a university, thanks to the heirs in our community as well, that many of the students go to, but they'll go anywhere and everywhere, but that's where the majority of the students go.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for about this particular job now for about 8 years, and you have your master's in this field.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about, maybe just give us a feel for a couple of the kinds of students you work with. You know, one group has this kind of interest, another group is more like this. Just to make it real for us, who are your kids?
Okay, so our largest employer in the area is education, our education system. But many of our students are interested in the ag fields because that's another large employer for our area as well. Technical school. I feel like we have a very large variety of students who want to do a lot of different things, whether it's engineering. A lot of students go to our Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology or your tech schools and do different programs there. So it's a big variety.
So what is it that you provide that makes you this barrier breaker? What's the nature of the relationship you're trying to form with the students? When does it start, and what do you do with them?
So we start meeting with them in about 8th grade. We have a couple of different events that we do in the 8th grade so that they're seeing us. We feel like a big piece of it is the exposure. You need to know who we are, what we do, and how we're here to help, and building that trust and support within the community, and letting everybody know that we're here to make your lives better, your education experience better, and as Ms. Ayers said, to break down barriers. With her, there is no box. With the Ayers Foundation, there is no box. So if we think of something that's going to benefit our students, our community, we're able to try those things out and help in every way that we can.
When I was president of Franklin and Marshall College, we were one of the sites for an organization called the College Advising Corps, which provides college advising around the country and probably has something like 600 to 700 younger people making 2-year commitments to work in the space. So they haven't gotten master's degrees like you, and they don't necessarily stay in it all the way through. They make a big impact. Michelle Bailey is one of those. We'll get to her in a moment. But what I want to ask you right now is the power and value of there being someone like you empowered to play this role. Why is it important?
Do you mind if I share a story?
Please do.
My college experience was almost traumatic. So the night before I was supposed to start school, I'd already been to orientation, had already mapped out where all my classes were in each building, and I was a commuter student, so I squalled. I cried like a big baby. Mom, I'm not going to school. This is not for me. I can work minimum wage. I'd worked in high school and did a minimum wage job. I'll just stay. I'll work 3 or 4 jobs if I have to, but I'm not going to school. I can't do this. And my mom coached me, and it's going to be okay. All the things you say as a parent, oh, you're fine. It's going to be okay. So the morning of my first class, my mom rode in her car, and I drove mine. And I had an 8 a.m. class, arrived at University of North Alabama in the parking lot. And we sat and talked for about 20 minutes before I went to my first class, still crying. I'm like, get over myself, at this point. But she was like, you're going to be okay. Let's just get through the first day. We'll see how it goes from there. So I walked to my first class. I arrived 20 minutes early. And 4 students that I had graduated high school with were in my first class, Psychology 101, at UNA. Still a nervous Nelly. I would have never done this 15 years ago if you said get up in front of a panel. No, not going to happen. I'll do anything but that. So I try to relate that moment and how I feel, how I felt at that time to my students, and the nervousness that sometimes they experience, and all of the questions that they may have that I had, or the things that I freak out about. We've taken students to orientation so that they're not going in blind, because sometimes they don't have a parent or a guardian or anyone who can take them to those things. We've moved students in, I think, nearly every summer that I've been with the foundation. Either I myself or another counselor has had to move a student into a dorm room or into an apartment for college because maybe they didn't have that support. We take campus visits so they can see those colleges, so that they get to go and see one-on-one. This is where you would eat. This is where you would sleep. This is where your classes would be. And to meet those admissions counselors and help them through the financial aid process and completing the FAFSA and everything that could be a barrier, anything that could be a barrier if it's transportation. Helping provide transportation for students has been big in this last year. It took me about a month to work out some transportation logistics for about 4 students that we had that were going to a local community college. And knowing that you have Mr. and Miss Ayers as your support and our directors and things, that's been monumental for those students.
So clearly, to be effective, you have to be able to build relationships with both students and families, and for that matter, teachers and colleagues in the school. And they have to be based on trust.
Yes.
So how do you develop trust with students who don't know you, or families who may be suspicious about whether their child should, be in college? Like, what do you do to work through that?
I relate a lot of what we do, and I think just in the counseling profession, I did mental health and substance abuse before, and a lot of times my clients would say, well, you don't know because you haven't been an addict or you haven't dealt with this. I don't feel like you have to experience those things to be able to help other people. You have to care. I have to put myself in your position. Okay, if I'm this student experiencing these things, how would I respond? What kind of supports would I need, or what things are available to me to help me feel supported and encouraged? And also, I'm in your face all the time. My students don't always like it, but you will see me in the hallway. I will go to your classroom. I will, if there's something different about a student, just walking in the hallway. If you're normally smiling and you're happy, and maybe there's a day that you're not yourself, I might pull you in my office and just say, hey, what's going on? You don't have to be a senior. You may be a freshman or a sophomore, but just making sure that I'm present, making sure that I'm available to talk to the students. We work 12 months out of the year.
Yeah.
So we're always there. We're there when no one else is there at the school. So if you need to come and see me, many of the students reach out and they text or email or Facebook, however they need to communicate with us. We want to make sure we're available to meet those needs.
Yeah, thank you.
Availability.
So Michelle Bailey is in her second year as a college advisor at Panther High School?
Panther Valley High School.
Panther Valley High School, located in coal country in Pennsylvania?
Yes, previous coal region in Pennsylvania, so northeast.
And you've been doing this for 2 years after having spent a year in Taiwan, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But you just heard Bree share some experiences about a very different part of the country, rural Tennessee. But I wonder, did it seem very different from the reality that you live and work in?
No, it did not seem different at all. In fact, I provide many of the same services to my students that Bree provides for hers in terms of campus visits, one-on-one consultations with my students, programming both for parents and for students, classroom presentations, things of that nature.
Yeah. And the College Advising Corps is kind of like Teach for America. It provides 2-year placements for students, and it gives you a chance to roll up your sleeves, get in there, and make a difference right now. And so did you have to overcome any feelings of imposter syndrome, that you were here trying to help and yet you didn't know as much as you wished you would have known?
Oh, of course, all the time. So the College Advising Corps, like you said, is a 2-year AmeriCorps partnered program. So it's a national nonprofit that brings recent college graduates to high schools across the nation. Our individual corps are kind of co-sponsored by partner universities and colleges. And so for the Pennsylvania College Advising Corps specifically, we have a partnership with Franklin and Marshall College, Gettysburg College, Dickinson College, and Millersville University. And we sort of sit on their payroll, have trainings at Franklin and Marshall College. They kick in some funding for us, so that's kind of how that partnership works. So it's a little bit different in that I will not be staying at the same school for longer than 2 years because it is an AmeriCorps position. However, what comes with that, though, is, of course, it's a near-peer model, which means that because I just graduated college in 2017, I'm still intimately familiar with things like the FAFSA and things of that nature. That being said, however, because it was one of my first jobs right out of college, of course, I feel imposter syndrome all the time. We are all very scared to go into students, and sometimes, we really feel like we have futures in our hands, and in a way, we kind of do. And so, yeah, it's very scary to kind of be that guidepost for some people, but we have excellent training and excellent resources in our staff and in our national organization. And so that definitely helps us feel confident in the work that we're doing.
And one way to think about the role that philanthropy plays is, of course, philanthropy is a major driver of the existence of the College Advising Corps.
Yes.
If we didn't have a number of generous donors in a variety of different backgrounds and parts of the country, this wouldn't exist. And there really is an incredible, I'll call it opportunity gap for students in under-resourced schools, where there can be thousands of students for a single college advisor.
Yes.
It makes such a difference to have a Bree or a Michelle that you can talk to.
Yeah.
Now, you're not only a college advisor, but you're an alum
Yep.
of a school that had college advisors, and your college advisor helped get you on the trajectory that you then ran with as a student at my school at Franklin and Marshall College. Could you say a little bit about Michelle Bailey, 15-year-old, Michelle Bailey, 16-year-old, and how the presence of a version of Bree or a version of yourself made a real difference?
Yeah, so one of the things that I always like to say about the College Advising Corps is that the reason I'm a college advisor is because I had a college advisor. So I saw firsthand the impact that this program has. So it was really important for me to pay that forward. And things that my college advisor did for me was I had no idea how to apply to college. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I had no idea what that process looked like. So not only was just kind of like that logistical help helpful, I remember specifically sitting in my college advisor's office and being so scared of the Common App and that if I answered one question wrong, then everybody would reject me and I'd never go to college. So she sat with me for like an hour while I was like, Miss Datello, like what's the answer to this question? And she's like, Michelle, they're asking for your name. So that was really just that support and just her like, undying belief in me was so helpful. And beyond that, she actually nominated me for Franklin and Marshall's college prep program, which was a summer immersion program in which we took college classes and we had personal and professional development. And I can honestly say almost 10 years later that truly changed the trajectory of my life. And I think that's something that's super important for rural students is that we'll talk a lot today about expanding opportunity in rural communities and kind of try to defray that brain drain. And I think that's absolutely so important. But when we talk about things like academic, social, and financial fit, it's really important for students to see opportunities and options beyond their immediate vicinity. And that's something that helped me a lot. I would not have found Franklin and Marshall without my college advisor. So absolutely, I give her a lot of credit for where I am now. And I think that that's super important for rural students to see and experience and be exposed to.
I had the privilege of meeting Michelle when she was in that program, which was in the summer of 2012.
Yep.
So you were a junior in high school. And there were 60 or 70 students who stayed 3 weeks on campus. And they were referred to us by college advisors around the country. That's how we created it. Without the advisors, we wouldn't have known for the students that they existed. And one of the things that was just so exciting was seeing all these kids referred by college advisors now on campus, all lapping it up, loving it, falling in love with each other. Kids from north, south, east, and west, all different backgrounds, everything you can imagine, all together. One thing in common, all low income. And then you went back for senior year with that experience, that affective experience, as part of your sensibility. And was there at all a challenge of talking to your parents about the possibility of applying to a school that costs so much and going away and living on campus?
Yes. So my mom actually did not want me to apply to Franklin and Marshall because she saw the net price, the sticker price. And she was like, oh, $60,000 a year, we could never afford that. Like, I don't want you to even apply because what if you get in? What if you are heartbroken because we can't send you there? And I remember being like, no, at college prep, they talked about this thing called financial aid. And she's like, that sounds fake. But it really wasn't because I went ahead, I pushed ahead, I applied to F&M anyway. And then when we got that financial aid package, my mom cried. So like when we talk about financial fit, that's a really big aspect of it. And so that's why it's important for me to have conversations with my students, not only about the academic and social fit of college, but also that financial piece, because my students are very, very concerned, especially when they're reading things in the news of these horror stories of college graduates coming out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And one of the things I always like to tell them is that doesn't have to be the case for you. There is a path forward. There are smart financial decisions we could be making, and that's something that I focus on a lot with my students.
Yeah. One of the things that is fun to be able to tell you is that Michelle didn't just go to college and learn a lot. She was a leader on campus in all sorts of ways, enhancing the education of every student. And I think she maybe got like 1 B+ across 4 years.
I didn't actually.
Federal law prohibits me from saying her exact GPA, but it was one of the very, very highest in the school, after which she won a Fulbright scholarship to go teach and work in Taiwan before choosing to come back. So that's something to sort of Think about it, to come come back home, back to the community, back to work with other young people, cut from the same cloth, a lot like you. It's pretty cool. Okay, let's one more panelist. Hal, great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks for traveling out from Missouri. Will you say a little bit about what OTC is, just to orient everybody?
So OTC, Ozarks Technical Community College, is a public community college, one of 12 in the state. We're the third largest. We're located in the southwest part of Missouri. Springfield is our main campus and our large hub, but we have campuses and centers located throughout 12 counties.
So tell us about your student profile.
Student profile is interesting. During the Great Recession, our average age was 28. Today it's 20. So we do not have a lot of non-traditional students. They're working. We have a very low unemployment rate. About a third of our students are rural. But if you look at our service area, half of our service area is rural, which means there's a low attainment rate of rural students going to the college.
Yeah. So talk about that. I want to come to your partnership with AIRS
Right.
in a moment, but before we get there, can you say a little bit about the challenges and the value of expanding access? Bob pointed to some figures that are
Right.
pretty important for the country. And then secondly, well, let's start with that, and then I want to talk about outcomes in a moment.
Well, we obviously we're located in Springfield, which is our population center, but we have campuses and centers strategically throughout the area. You know, when the community college system really started running in the 60s, the idea was try to get somebody within 60 miles of a college. Yeah. So we have those outposts there, and we have the ability to serve them, but there's still a low attainment rate, which is what we've been looking in what we partnered with Root Ed and then the foundation to get those students to understand they can go to college.
And why do you believe yourself that that's important?
Well, I was a first generation college student. Yeah. I went off to the University of Alabama and went in a class with 400 people, and I did not make a B+. I didn't even make a C+. I probably would have been better off to go to a community college, but I didn't know till I was a sophomore you could even drop a class. Yeah. I saw my high school counselor one time in 4 years, and that was to sign up for the ACT. So I know that our counselors are overburdened. And I also know that we have families where they don't even know what a Pell Grant is. They don't know. So we can't depend on the high school to do it because they have too much. So I really feel like if those students can get that education and fill the jobs that are sitting there in that community, as we saw earlier, somebody has to get them 8th grade, 9th grade. You can't wait. And then we want them to stay in that community. And if they have to move to Springfield or move to Columbia or move to Tuscaloosa, they'll never come back. Yeah. So we want to educate them where they are, but we got to get them in the door first.
And why do you believe, and I don't doubt it, but just to hear your thoughts, why do you believe that the education that OTC offers is a springboard into economic security and professional opportunity? Because that's got to be the doubt some people have about taking the plunge.
Well, we deal with two things. I grew up in Alabama and grew up in rural areas. There is a mistrust of education. There's a lot of people in our communities who think that, my dad used to refer to it as being educated beyond your intelligence, which he called eggheads, PhDs like me. So I think you have to overcome that mistrust. Yeah. And so if we ever get them in the door, even if it's for a 6-week CNA program or a phlebotomist, if you get them to learn, we have these boys all the time who think they can't learn, but we teach high school. We have 800 high school students who come and take auto body or welding, and they find out they're not bad learners, they just hated high school. Yeah. So we have to get them in a better environment and see that and we even now through our middle college program, we have kids who are unplugging from high school, and we're just taking them into college as juniors, and then they're graduating with an associate degree and a high school diploma at the same time. Yeah. So we know if we get them in the door, they can become a doctor, a lawyer, a welder, a nurse, whatever they want to be. We just got to get them in the door. Yeah.
You know, I'm going to pause on welder for a second.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it, but Paul Tuff has this big book about some of the problems in education, some of the opportunities. Yeah. And he makes the point that a lot of people that say college isn't worth it say you can be a welder, not realizing that you need a 2-year degree in most cases, to be a welder.
Well,
Is that
no,
right?
that's not true. You need a 20-week master welding. We did away with the 2-year degree for
Yeah.
welding, and that's what we've got to do as educators. We need to get away of thinking in years.
Yeah.
We need to think in certificates. We need to think in programs. You want to become a welder, you go for 20 weeks, 40 hours a week. You don't get absences. You can't be late. You graduate. You're a master welder. You make $28 an hour, and it goes on from there. It's that one-on-one economic development.
Okay, so now how many fields have you made that kind of adjustment from years to training?
We're doing it in nursing. We're doing it in all across the curriculum. We're getting ready to build a $40 million Center for Advanced Manufacturing. Everything in that building is going to be that way. We have to quit thinking like educators and start thinking like business people.
Does that mean you have to work in a new way with businesses?
No, the businesses are so desperate right now, we could tell them to stand on their heads and they'd do whatever we tell them. Because, Janet knows this, you cannot find people to work.
Yeah.
We're the stainless capital of the country. More stainless is done in our town than anywhere else. If you drink beer, milk, or wine, the vat came from Springfield. We have a huge manufacturing base. 3M, all these companies, they're desperate for skilled workforce. Our unemployment is super low.
Yeah.
The only way we're going to do it is to get those people who are underemployed employed up.
Yeah, and is part-time education a part of the equation also?
Our average student only takes 10 hours a semester.
Yeah.
They work 30 hours a semester.
Yeah.
Our students aren't coming and sitting, going home and having keg parties. They're coming to school when they can, and they're working 2 and 3 jobs. And so part-time is the norm. Half of our students are part-time, half are full, but even those working full-time, going to school full-time, are still working full-time.
So talk a little bit now about the connection from Root Ed to the Ayers Foundation and what it is that you're getting from this relationship.
Well, you mentioned a bolt of lightning. We did not have a bolt of lightning, but we found somebody, and that was Root Ed and the work we did with doing with Noah and with Lisa, and then the connection they made with not only the Ayers Foundation, but also Achieving the Dream.
Yeah.
And it let us see a better way. I was talking earlier about, I believe in stealing. I think we should all steal. And we had a problem, and so we sought out the best answer, and we found it in Tennessee, and we stole it and took it to Missouri, and we tweaked it a little bit, because instead of the foundation putting people in the high schools, we're putting our employees, partially funded by Root Ed, and then we're putting them in the high school to do the same thing they're doing.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing fabulous results.
Okay, so partly it's that the Ayers Foundation is sharing with you
Yes.
the lessons learned.
They're
how it
teaching
can
us how to
work.
do it.
They're teaching you how to
Yeah.
grow your own core
Right.
of Breeze. But then also, the model here sounds like it may end up kind of like paying for itself, because
It
if
will.
more students enroll, you'll then have more resources. Is that right? How that,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not only enrolled, if you, in 2026, we're going to have not very many high school seniors.
Yeah.
So we see that coming. And so we know that by increasing the yield of students coming to college, but we didn't stop there. With the help that we've been given, we're also changing the way we do our advising inside the college. So when they get to college, they get one navigator who stays with them to graduation. Yeah. So we're taking what they've done in the high school, and we're changing our own institution to fit it. And it will pay for itself. Because if you look at the waterfall effect, you start with 100 applicants. You're going to get down to 20 that actually apply and graduate. Right. So you lose from maybe 100 to 80 who show up, 60 who go through, and then this many graduate. You add all the way on that waterfall exponentially, it's going to pay for itself and be a profit maker, which will let you have more services. So my goal is to get these at every high school in Southwest Missouri.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, do a lot of your students later transfer to four-year colleges?
Half of our students are going to transfer. Half are there for a terminal degree, like dental hygienist or whatever. Yeah. But our city is full. We have 55,000 college students in our city, and they're all located within a mile of each other. So in Springfield, there's a lot of options. Plus, we also have Missouri State University, who co-locates with us in other spots. So there's a lot of ability to get that four-year degree.
So there's an advising component to that too, in helping students learn about transfer opportunities.
And we even have a Missouri State University employee full-time on our campus who sits with our, at our front desk. So when you come in and you start with our navigator and they say, I'm going to transfer to Missouri State, they say, oh, let's all meet together. So the 4-year and the 2-year and the high school student are all meeting at the same time.
Yeah. So what I want to do now is pull back a little bit and ask a question or two of everybody, and then in about 10 minutes or so, open it up to you as the audience and also to the online audience. So think about if you have a question. I think Janet's going to help us get the questions from the floor here with the mic. And we want to use the mic because we're going to capture this and we want to be able to share it with others who weren't here today. So we've heard, really like success. Very, very positive, practical, change-oriented people that work in different ways together to make the system work better. I want to start with you, Bob, and just ask you, as you presented this critical data about the under-inclusion of rural students in college opportunity. Then you hear this panel of people that are getting it done. What takeaway do you have from listening to this?
Well, particularly for the low-income rural student, having a trusted advisor early on to help guide, maybe take the place of what second generations depend upon their parents for, is critically important. But the other is that when we start thinking about leveraging local assets, the local community college is a tremendous asset, particularly to low-income rural students who may not have the option for family circumstances of leaving. And that relationship with that local community college then can be leveraged, to your point, to transfer to the university or to gain employment in the community. But probably more important, it means that students don't have to leave the community in order to gain a college education, which increases the likelihood that they're going to stay in the community and not be part of the out-migration of young talent that plagues so many rural areas today.
So I wonder, and I'll go to Bob again, and then we'll come back around, but do you think that there are lessons that we can take from this set of experiences that genuinely can be scaled, that we can get structures to create more people in the roles that we are hearing here, more community college presidents and leaders focusing in this way, more college advisors, more philanthropies investing in practical solutions, or basically, should we just give them all award and say, you're the best, there'll never be anybody like you?
Well, first of all, they present something that's missing from the lexicon of examples. Most of the examples of high performance are pulled from metropolitan areas, from large community colleges, instead of small rural communities. And so that's one thing that they've done, is they've lifted that example up. The second is they demonstrated a role for philanthropy to be an early funder and a catalyst. And if I were going to recommend that the Ayers Foundation, together with other in-place foundations, learn to collaborate among themselves to incentivize local institutions like high schools and community colleges to get into this.
Yeah, thank you. Let's just work right down with maybe a comment from each, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So start with Hal. Do you feel that you're onto something that is like a spreadable among people in your roles?
So if I'm at another community college and I look at the data that our office is putting together, I ought to be fired if I don't do this.
Yeah.
That's what I would say to my colleagues. It is such a simple yet effective way. We should have been doing it 25, 30 years ago. We're just glad you invented it.
Yeah. Michelle, sometimes people make claims that begin with the sentence, young people these days, ... It's almost always a boomer that says it. It's almost always a sweeping generalization, and it's usually a little bit negative. Yeah. What do you think about your generation's interest in this broad question of educational opportunity and equity?
Yeah, so I'm thinking not just my generation, but the generation I'm advising, this upcoming Gen Z generation. And my students are incredibly smart and incredibly shrewd. And they are very focused on the economics. And in fact, sometimes when we talk about this rural mistrust of higher education, I think that sometimes there's a mismatch between higher education opportunities and what students are seeing in their local economy. Particularly in some of our areas where the industry is really shifting and it's a little unstable. And so I think that, there are some real fears there, like, is higher education actually going to provide better outcomes for me than just continuing my high school job after I graduate? So my students are very aware of these financial and economic issues. They're very concerned about them. They're very practical and they're very pragmatic in their approach to education. And so I think, sometimes this generation gets a bad rap about things of being too obsessed with their technology or not being critical enough or not being concerned with things that are happening in our society. But that's not the reality. The reality is they're very aware of what's going on. They're very concerned about it. They're very practical in their approaches to their future and their worldview.
Yeah. Breeze, thoughts you might have about how we can get more school systems making the investments that the Ayers Foundation has made in you to be able to provide this constant professional presence now, 8 years running, and is this something that we can get others to follow the path?
I think so. The work that we do is so powerful. We're not taking away from our school counselors, but we're adding value to our school systems. So I think if you said to Riverside High School that we're removing the Ayers Foundation, they would probably find a way to have us available in the school because of the impact that it has had in other communities as well, because we're now working in Lawrence County, which is where I'm from, and I know that they're already talking about it. I'm not home, I'm not there all the time, but even my parents are talking about it, and other people that I have encountered, like, why didn't we have this a long time ago? This is something that we have to keep, and it's value in more than one way.
Yeah, and I think Janet, I'm sure that Noah is thinking like I'm thinking, how do we get more foundation leaders and philanthropists to follow your example? I want to ask you a question as a business leader. I was so struck with the insights that you brought into philanthropy from business. Do you think those that believe we should be investing in the education of the young, have any gulf to climb over to win the business community to this perspective? Are we there? Are we close? Are we far away? What could we do better to engage business in educational excellence?
I think we're close. I think we're closer than we have been in the past. I think the big disconnect and the divide has always been that education has been a space that we as a country have historically thrown a lot of money at without the metrics moving a whole lot. If we had run our business the same way that we had funded and managed the education space, I wouldn't be able to be a philanthropist. Yeah. So it's that return on investment approach that we brought to this, and I think that's how you bring other philanthropists into the conversation. We are a good catalyst. What philanthropy is good at is innovation and implementation. Scaling and long-term funding is why you need the state and federal government and local governments partnering, not necessarily leading, but partnering. But it's that return on investment that we really hadn't brought into the education world. We'll spend billions of dollars in education to move the percentage by a couple of percentages. I'm spending $100,000, $200,000 in a school, and in 1 year, I'm moving the needle by 15% in 1 year. Yeah. Business partners and philanthropists will do that all day long.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Can I add something to that? And the other thing, some of us are going to go to the Hill today and tomorrow. But we have a bill that's been introduced. I think that's Senate Bill 3155. That is a good start. It's not a lot of money, but I think the federal government has a role here. Agreed. Because if you take philanthropy, you take colleges, universities, and your state and your federal government, I think getting that bill through and getting that seed money to do this, then this could be scalable through 50 states.
Can you give us a sentence on what the bill would do?
What the bill would basically do, I think $60 million, Noah. Noah can correct me, but that would be really seed money to go out and do this nationwide. Yeah. And you think about $60 million out of $1 trillion budget. They should have that just lying around the floor. Yeah. So this should be a no-brainer. Yeah. So that's what we're going to tell them this afternoon. But it's a very simple idea, and I think really it just scales up what we've seen in Tennessee and now Missouri.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's open up the floor. Janet?
We have a first question from a member of the Rural Development Innovation Group in Arkansas. What is the role, Inez Polonius, what is the role of entrepreneurship education at your rural community colleges, or where do you see that happening?
That is key. In fact, part of our new curriculum that we're going to be putting in for our Center for Advanced Manufacturing that we're building, we're weaving entrepreneurship all the way through the curriculum, not just in business anymore. It needs to be, because we find that most of our entrepreneurs, you get a degree in HVAC, within 2 or 3 years, you've opened up your own shop.
Yeah.
Nobody taught you about how to do the books. Nobody taught you. So we're trying to weave entrepreneurship through all of our trades and even our medical field.
Yeah.
But so if you're gonna graduate from a community college or a university, even in liberal arts, you need to have that entrepreneurship, because I grew up the son of an entrepreneur. I watched him build a business, my parents together, and that's why I operate the way I did. But nobody taught me that at the University of Alabama.
Yeah.
I had to learn it on my own.
Bree, what did you say to a student who has that entrepreneurial fire or excitement or connection to family when they say, well, you know, that's what I want to do. I want to build a business. I don't think I need college.
Yes, you do. You're going anyway. No, open up some dialogue about what does that look like for you. Do you have a good understanding of what it would look like to open your own business? Do you have the foundation that's needed? Do you have the financial support? All those questions that you need to think about. What does 10 years down the road look like? Because we only want to look at what's right here, right now.
Yeah.
So trying to encourage them to think about how this degree or how this program could help you in the future, even if you don't use it right now, but how you could use that to leverage what you do want to do.
Yeah. And what do you say?
Yeah, so very similarly, I actually just kind of start by asking them questions. So I'm like, do you know how to do payroll? And they're like, no. And I'll say, do you know what the laws are in that industry locally? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look at some of these business classes at our local community college. That might be able to help us out with some of those skills that we need to learn to open up our own business.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, good, thank you. Janet, next question.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for all of your feedback. This has been a really great panel. My name is Rachel Rushmarlow. I work with the Association of Community College Trustees, and we're also doing work right now around strengthening rural community colleges in 5 states. I also grew up in a rural area, so I'm really engaged in this topic. My question is primarily for Bob, but also for some of the rest of you. I was curious about the data that you presented, and one of the things that's come up as really foundational in our work is how rural is defined. Not only to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, but again, with access to philanthropic or government, federal or state funding, finding out and determining who is rural and what is a rural community college is really important. And so I was curious as to how it was defined in the data that you were working with, but also with the AIRS Scholars Program and College Advising Corps, how institutions or high schools are identified to partner with.
I think that's a really important question. The definitions that we worked with came from the Bureau of the Census, the Department of Agriculture, and the Higher Education Clearinghouse. So we didn't create those definitions. But there is a tendency to generalize about rural America as though there's one rural America. There's not one rural America. There are many different types. Some are affiliated with metropolitan areas and some are isolated. I'll just stop there. Each has its own characteristics, and the local community colleges that serve them have distinctive problems and challenges that they face. But we took a broad swath at how to take a look at our country, and it's pretty clear that with the characteristics of non-metropolitan affiliated areas, that there are significant challenges with college going, and then with college attainment, students coming back to those rural communities. And just to a point on entrepreneurship, so many students, particularly attending a community college, have never considered for a moment anything other than working for someone else. Creating another model for them creates hope for rural America, because you can think about staying in place and running your business.
Yeah, that's very good. Great point. Janet, a quick word on how you pick your schools?
So just to your definition of rural, we use the development district for Tennessee for rural, but then leadership matters. We're not going to go into a community that doesn't want us to be there, and you would think fundamentally they would want you there, but we're a pretty heavy-handed approach program. You know, our model works, so we need to partner with the leadership in the community, because as you go through that process, you're partners. We're not in there in a silo doing our own thing. We're doing everything in conjunction. So we do a major screening process to make sure that the leadership and the foundation can lock arms around those students and that they understand all means all, that we aren't cherry picking a subgroup of these students. We are serving every single student in that system.
Yeah. That's pretty much how the College Advising Corps works too. And a school has to be able to demonstrate a readiness to support all students being assisted by an advisor. And also, as I understand it, the College Advising Corps has to be careful about growth. It can't grow too fast. The key is to make sure that they're recruiting Michelle Baileys into this role and preparing them properly. And it's been a steady growth, but not too fast to handle, I'd say.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being such an inspiring panel. My name is Sheila Martin. I'm with the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, and I work with universities, particularly the land grants that have really strong roots in rural communities. And they're also looking at rural students as an underserved demographic. And one of the things that they know they need to do is to work closely with the community colleges that many of these students are attending first, but also to give those students the option to go on to the four-year university if that's what they choose to do. What have you observed or witnessed or tried with respect to the best practices for those partnerships between the community college, and the four-year university?
Yep. Bob, do you want to say a word on that?
Sure. So probably the most inspiring is where the partnership involves a baccalaureate completion strategy staying in the community, often with the community college, and often aligned to labor market requirements there. So if you look at probably the most successful are where community college, a school system, and a university, a land grant university, team together in growing our own teachers. So a good example of that is North Carolina State University together with Johnston Tech and the Johnston County school system, where students begin, while they're still in early college through dual enrollment, to begin preparing for teacher jobs. They're dually admitted to both the community college and to NC State simultaneously. Once they get the associate degree in science, they're automatically admitted to the university and do their practicum with the school system. So they never have to leave the community. There's a short period where they have to go to NC State, but otherwise they're in the community. They start with the notion that I'm going to serve the community, and it's a win-win-win all around. But we have to integrate systems. This notion that we have this, and then you go over there and you do that, and then over here to do that, and hope you return. The system is not integrated for students. They have to navigate it by themselves.
How?
And we're doing that with Missouri State University. And for instance, one of our rural communities, Lebanon, Missouri, which is one of our schools that we serve, you can start in high school. We own a campus there, a facility there. Missouri State University is co-located. We have free community college, so for the first 2 years are free. You do not have to go to the Missouri State campus a single time. You can go completely there in Lebanon, Missouri, and then you can go to work just down the street, right back as soon as you graduate in that May. So we're piloting. We did that there. We're going to be doing it in Taney County, in the Branson-Hollister area. So we're doing it pretty much all over our district. School districts are desperate for students. It's good pay. They're usually the largest employer in most communities, and so we're really concentrated on that. But we couldn't do it without our local university, because they're the key to making that work.
I have a bunch of questions here from cyberspace that I need to get to quickly. Can you discuss what is being done to support tribal students or tribal colleges? Do any of you have any experience on that? Not on this panel?
Yeah.
Anyone know anything? Okay, so we need to address that. What limits community colleges from doing this mentoring human-to-human work given current funding streams?
Well,
Why aren't they all doing it?
I don't think they know about it yet. Frankly.
Oh, that's why we're doing this panel, right?
That's right.
Yeah, there you go.
But frankly, there's foundations. We have a great local foundation in Springfield, a community foundation. I think that getting the word out, and I think most college presidents are looking at budgets going down. I think this is a way to grow your budget.
Great.
And it's just taking a business model that works, but like any venture, you got to have some venture capital. And I think that's where philanthropy comes in. That's where this bill that we're looking at on Capitol Hill comes in, is you get that seed money, and then it'll pay for itself if you do it correctly.
And one more cyberspace before we get back to questions in the room. What can states do to address the paradox that Bob discussed? You talked about this federal bill. Is there any state policy you can talk about that can make a difference?
I'm happy to do that because I feel like Tennessee has been a thought leader in the whole process of K through 12 connecting to higher education. I know that Hal would talk about that Missouri was probably the first to have free community college, but Tennessee really did something that was called Tennessee Promise, which was free for all high school students graduating, receive free technical and community college. The reality of what Tennessee really did is they changed a culture and a narrative around the state. Very much like what we did at the foundation is, if you can address, and even what Michelle was talking about, if you can address that the financial piece is going to be covered and you can put it to the side and then really start working student by student, you can do it. But it really took that public-private catalyst in Tennessee to move that needle, to change the policies about things as simple as your degree, what you're acquiring, your credit hours, what you're accomplishing in community college, that they transfer to higher education, to that four-year university. That's something that is a policy lever that Tennessee did, that until we had that conversation, and you got serious about it, you could talk about that transition and that pathway. But what our students were finding was when they went on to that four-year university, their credit hours and what they had earned at the community college did not transfer to every university. And that's a policy lever that your states can do when they get to start doing that deep dive, and everybody comes to the table and starts talking about it. And lots of times philanthropy is that neutral party in the room that becomes the great convener to get everybody around the room talking about those things to change those policy levers.
I think it's also pretty clear there's a lot of states that are experimenting with more funding for two-year colleges. And I think one of the important things, this goes back to, I think, your amazing insight, was to tie increases of funding to demonstrated outcomes and impacts. And the more we can do that, the more the case can be built for state action. Something to watch, to be candid, is that the flagship public institutions of many states are not doing enough to connect with their two-year colleges. They're not opening up pipelines to community colleges at the same level that more of the regional or local four-year institutions are. We're noticing, for example, a great many public institutions are drawing 40, 50, even 60% of their students from out of state. And when they do that, when they build an big out-of-state pipelines, one of the groups that really is at risk of having access are the graduates of two-year colleges for whom the four-year flagship is the right next step.
I'm gonna, in our current reality, I'm gonna try and stay away from this microphone we're passing from hand to hand. But my name's Trudy Vincent.
Tyler, hold it a little closer to her. Thank you.
All right. My name's Trudy Vincent. I'm with the University of Chicago. And thanks to extraordinary partnership with Root Ed, we are able to put together a program for rural students. And I know Franklin and Marshall have done some remarkable things in support of the AIRS Foundation. But to build on your last comment and the APLU comment, a lot of what you've been talking about is what K through 12 should be doing to help students. But I'd like to hear your views on what institutions of higher education, both public and private, can do to encourage more rural students to reach higher and reach further.
Let me open it up first. I think the moderator should step down, even though I have a lot of ideas.
I can mention one success story recently. You mentioned the large universities.
Yeah.
The University of Missouri had a new president 2 or 3 years ago, Dr. Moon Choi, who came from Connecticut, and he immediately recognized they did not serve community colleges. You could not take English at another college and not retake it there. If you went to Harvard and transferred to the University of Missouri, you had to retake English. So we challenged him on it. They created a community college transfer program, heavily scholarshiped, and then they have a mentoring. So when every community college student comes to the University of Missouri, Columbia, they are with a student who the year before was mentored for a year. They take them to Rush, they show them where the cafeteria is, where the secret good parking places are, and they had a 16% increase in community college enrollment last year. Yeah. And so they completely ignored us for 100 years. but enrollment dipped, to be frank, and they found the community colleges. Now, our fear is if enrollment ever goes up, they may forget about us, but I don't think so.
Brianna, Michelle, is there anything you'd like to see four-year colleges start to do?
I think the first thing is truly, I would really like to see more four-year colleges go test optional. I have brilliant students who are just scoring well below the national average on the ACT and the SAT, and they are fully capable of doing college level work, and they're not necessarily getting that opportunity, or sometimes they'll be admitted and they'll be given no merit scholarships, things of that nature, and it becomes very, very difficult for them to be successful at college. So that's step number one. Step number two is that mentorship piece that you're talking about. I think that there's been a lot of national conversations about mentorship for underrepresented students at four-year campuses, but unfortunately rural students kind of get left out of those conversations. We really need mentorship that is focused solely on rural students, because a lot of them do have trouble adjusting academically, socially, and culturally to institutions like Franklin and Marshall, like University of Chicago, and you're going to have a hard time retaining those students unless there is someone there to guide them that really understands where they're coming from, really understands their culture, really understands the obstacles that they're facing.
Brianna?
I think they need to visit the schools as well. I know it's not always an easy thing to do, but visit the high schools. The students need to see you on their campus, that you care about having them on your campus as a full-time student. You need to see them in their elements, in their environment as well, so you can have a better understanding. Sometimes I think we know everything that's going on, but until you see it for yourself, it's totally different.
One of the best things we did, it was just a program, but we had a couple hundred kids, maybe you did it, who came to campus junior year of high school. We bussed them from all over the state, called it College Summit, and they took a day of classes and a day of learning about the dorms and hearing from college kids about adjustment, hearing from financial aid, open the doors wide. And I think the big answer here is that four-year colleges, if you're thinking about the ones that are the more highly selective, they need to have an agenda that's about the educational ecosystem and not just about what they are, what they do. That whether it's partnering with local public school, whether it's expanding opportunities for kids to be a part of campus life, whether it's enhancing teaching education to get more kids in the community, whether it's flat out funding partnerships to get more money into public schools to help them. The big step, I think, is that the four-year colleges can easily say, well, everything before us isn't our job. And I really think that's the conceptual breakthrough that's probably needed. And there's lots of good things you can do once you make that breakthrough.
One other thing they can do, if they give a freshman a scholarship. Not all those freshmen are going to make it to the senior year.
Yeah.
They need to double up the scholarship for the successful community college transfer because they only have to spend it for 2 years. So what we've been trying to get them to do, you're going to spend this amount of money, and you're going to have an attrition rate. Take that money, put it on your junior and senior year, which Missouri State University and the University of Missouri has now done.
Yeah.
And that's why 60% of my graduates go to one school, Missouri State University, because of that reason.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that colleges are placing a bet, so to speak, when they award their financial aid or scholarships to high school seniors. A community college graduate has already proven that she can do college work.
And our students are more successful than the native student because they've already been through that.
Yeah.
So it's not even a bet when you're taking a community college graduate, not a transfer. Make sure they graduate, and then they go.
Yep.
One final quick question. Do counselors, advisors address academic high school readiness? They might have meant college readiness, I'm not sure, but this is the way it came in.
Yeah, I've been doing some more of that with my students individually recently. So one of the really important things I feel that I do and a lot of advisors do is I go into junior high classrooms, and I actually did a presentation for our entire 8th grade class, and we talk about what it looks like to be academically ready for college, and what sorts of courses you might want to think about taking, what sorts of grades colleges might look for, things that will help our students apply. And I've actually, this year, I started doing more kind of course registration conversations with many individual students where juniors will come to me and say, hi, Ms. Bailey, if I want to go to X college, what sorts of courses should I be looking to take my senior year? So absolutely, while that is probably primarily the job of our school counselors and they do a wonderful job at it, I absolutely have those conversations with my students as well.
You have to. Classroom presentations, I do a very specific financial aid presentation. It's usually 2 days in our personal finance class, and we talk about ACT, GPA, even income, and do college comparisons. We look at a tech school, a 2-year school, and a 4-year school, and we work it out on the board. If you're Joe and you have this on this is your GPA, this is your ACT, this is your household income, this is where you want to go to school, what your scholarship package would look like, and if that's feasible for you. And usually after I leave a junior classroom and have that presentation, I have 10 juniors follow me to my office and say, let's talk about what I'm going to do. What else do I need to do now? So, and I also try to do that in like future freshman night. So we talk about building your resume, all the things that you need to think about way before your senior year happens that you need to be planning for now. You get to start from scratch. It's fresh now. You're a freshman or you're going to be a freshman. Do what you need to do so that your senior year you're not freaking out.
One thing I want to say to close us, and then Janet, leave it to you, is that in thanking our panelists, is just to remember that what's so exciting is to be able to hear in Bree and Michelle, two professionals making a difference for so many students who themselves were of the type that you're working to help today. Education is about people. It's about investing in one another, in our communities, and helping people flourish. And when you see people that have been invested in, who then choose with your life's work to come back, pay it forward many times over with your lives, your commitments, that is inspiring. That's what it's all about. Thank you all for being here. Janet, thank you.
Now, I remember one thing. Janet never, I think, told everyone what the success rate is, your result rate. Could you just say that, the difference in the college going among the schools that you're working in?
We started with less than 20%, 80 to 90%, it depends on the school. Our lowest is 80% of the entire graduating senior class continues their education past high school. And of that, 75 to 80% are actually receiving the credential or the degree. And our counselors follow them from 8th grade until they complete. And we really haven't found anywhere in the country is having that success rate. I think our counselors would say there's something about that business model and accountability that gets baked into that formula a little bit too. But it's changing thousands of lives.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming today to the event live and to the live streaming. Thank you to Noah, Bob, Janet, Bree, Michelle, and Hal, and Dan. Thank you to our colleagues from the College Excellence Program, to Rural Development Innovation Group, and the Root Ed Alliance. We know that a healthy and more prosperous all of America requires a healthy, prospering rural America. That won't happen unless we pay close attention to the range of innovation coming out of rural America and better supporting it and better accelerating it. So stay tuned for our next Arrow event, which is going to be about community foundations doing catalytic community impact investing in rural America. It'll be sometime in the next few months. No dates set yet, but thank you again for coming. For now, stay safe, stay sanitized, and invest in rural America. Thank you.
Stay sanitized.